room was quiet except for the soft sound of papers sliding across the table. A large window behind the desk let in the pale afternoon light, and the city outside looked calm and distant. Inside the office, however, the air felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for something important to happen. She sat in the chair across from her husband, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The lawyer beside them cleared his throat and gently pushed a folder forward. "These are the final documents," he said in a careful voice. Her husband leaned back in his chair. His expression showed impatience more than emotion, like this meeting was just another task he needed to finish. He had already read everything earlier. For him, the decision had been made long ago. Around the room, a few members of his family sat quietly. They had insisted on being there. To them, this moment felt like the closing of a chapter they had never fully approved of. She opened the folder slowly. The pages inside were neat and official. Every line described the end of the life she had built during the past several years. Marriage dissolved. Assets divided. No further obligations. The words looked cold and simple, but behind them were years of memories. Some good, many painful. Her husband watched her carefully, expecting some kind of reaction. Maybe tears. Maybe anger. Maybe a last attempt to change his mind. But she simply read each page quietly. One of his relatives leaned toward another and whispered something under their breath. They didn't bother hiding the small smile that followed. To them, the situation had always been obvious. From the very beginning, they believed she didn't truly belong in their world. She came from a quiet background, far from the powerful business circles that surrounded their family. When the marriage first happened, many people had been surprised. Some had even called it a mistake. At first, she had tried very hard to prove them wrong. She had attended family dinners, charity events, and business parties. She listened carefully, spoke politely, and tried to make everyone comfortable. But no matter what she did, the distance never disappeared. Her husband slowly became colder over the years. What once felt like partnership slowly turned into silence. Conversations grew shorter. Time spent together became rare. Eventually, the warmth in the marriage faded completely. And now they were sitting in this quiet office, facing the end. She finished reading the last page and gently closed the folder. The lawyer placed a pen beside the papers. "If everything looks correct," he said, "you may sign here." Her husband crossed his arms and looked toward the window, almost bored. He expected hesitation, but she simply picked up the pen. For a brief moment, the room seemed to pause. Even the relatives sitting nearby stopped whispering. The pen touched the paper. With calm, steady handwriting, she signed her name. It took only a few seconds. When she finished, she placed the pen down and slid the papers back toward the lawyer. "That will be all," she said quietly. The lawyer nodded and began organizing the documents. Her husband looked surprised. Not because the divorce was happening, but because it had been so easy. "No questions?" he asked. She looked at him calmly. "No," she replied. The simplicity of her answer made the room feel strange for a moment. One of his relatives let out a small laugh. "Well," the person said softly, "that was quicker than expected." Another added, "Some people know when it's time to move on." The comments were quiet, but everyone heard them. She didn't react. Instead, she stood from the chair and straightened the sleeve of her coat. Her movements were calm and controlled, like someone finishing an ordinary appointment. Her husband watched her carefully now. For years he had believed he understood her completely. He thought she was gentle, quiet, and dependent on the life he provided. But in that moment, something about her seemed different. There was no sadness in her eyes. No anger either. Just a quiet calm. "You're leaving already?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He hesitated for a moment. "I thought you might want to discuss a few details." She shook her head slightly. "The documents explain everything." For the first time during the meeting, he seemed slightly uncomfortable. He had expected a longer conversation, maybe even a disagreement. Instead, she had simply accepted everything and signed. One of the relatives spoke again. "It's probably easier this way," the person said. Clean endings are always better. Another nodded in agreement. Yes, everyone can go back to their normal lives. She listened to the comments but showed no reaction. The lawyer finished arranging the papers and closed the folder. The divorce will be finalized once these documents are filed, he said. You will both receive official copies soon. Her husband nodded. Good. She picked up her small bag from the chair. For a moment, she looked around the room. It was not a dramatic glance. It was quiet and thoughtful, like someone closing a book they had finished reading. Years of memories had passed inside this marriage. Some moments had once felt hopeful. Others had slowly turned painful. But now, standing in that office, she felt something unexpected. Relief. Not excitement. Not happiness. Just a deep sense of calm. She walked toward the door. Behind her, the conversation in the room began again. One relative said, I suppose she'll move back to wherever she came from. Another replied, that would make sense. Someone else added, at least everything stayed within the family. Their voices faded as she stepped into the hallway. The door closed quietly behind her. Outside the office, the building felt peaceful. People walked through the corridor carrying files and talking softly. Life continued like nothing important had happened. She walked toward the elevator and pressed the button. While waiting, she looked at her reflection in the polished metal doors. For years, she had tried to become the person others expected her to be. Today, that pressure was finally gone. The elevator arrived with a soft sound. She stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, she exhaled slowly. The weight she had carried for so long seemed to lift from her shoulders. Downstairs, the lobby was bright with afternoon sunlight. A few people sat in chairs checking their phones, while others walked quickly toward the exit. She stepped outside onto the street. The air felt cool and fresh. Cars moved through traffic, and the distant sound of the city filled the background. For a few seconds, she simply stood there. The past several years had ended with a single signature. Many people believed that moment meant she had lost everything. They believed she had walked away with nothing. But the truth was far more complicated. Long before she had ever met her husband, her life had followed a very different path. A path few people knew about. She had never spoken much about her childhood or her family's past. During the marriage, she kept those details quiet. Not because she was hiding anything, but because she wanted a simple life. She wanted people to know her for who she was, not for the history behind her name. Unfortunately, the marriage had never truly given her that chance. Now, standing on the sidewalk outside the office, she realized something important. For the first time in years, she was completely free to decide her own future. No expectations. No pressure from a powerful family. No need to prove herself to people who had already judged her. A black car passed slowly down the street. The sunlight reflected across the glass buildings nearby. She began walking. Each step felt lighter than the last. Behind her, in that quiet office upstairs, people were already moving on with their day. They believed the story had ended the moment she signed the divorce papers. They believed the quiet woman had simply accepted her fate. None of them imagined that this calm moment was actually the beginning of something far bigger. And none of them would expect what would happen next. Because the woman who had just walked away from that office carried a past, and a future, that would soon surprise everyone who thought they knew her. After the divorce, she returned quietly to the small town where she had grown up. Most people who knew her story believed she had lost everything. They thought she had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and no future beyond the life she had walked away from. But the truth was far from what anyone assumed. Her childhood had not been ordinary. Years before, her father had built a business from nothing. He had started with a tiny shop and worked tirelessly, slowly growing it into something significant. Then, unexpectedly, he disappeared from the public eye. Many assumed the business had failed, or that the family had moved on quietly. In reality, he had set things up carefully. Over time, he placed much of the wealth and investments into trusts and legal structures that were meant to remain dormant until the right moment. She had known pieces of the truth during her marriage, but she had never spoken about it. She had chosen to live a simple life, to be recognized for her own character, not the money that had been waiting quietly in the background. She never wanted to let anyone think she had married for wealth. During the years of her marriage, she had kept herself small, hoping for acceptance from a world that never truly welcomed her. But now that she was free, she received letters and calls from lawyers and advisors she had never met before. These were the people who had been quietly managing her father's estate. They explained to her that she was now the primary heir to a fortune that had grown steadily over the years. Properties, investments, and companies. All of it had been waiting for her. First, she couldn't believe it. It seemed like a story from a dream. She walked through her childhood home slowly, touching old furniture and remembering the simpler days before wealth had become a shadowy, hidden presence in her life. She had grown up learning responsibility and hard work. Now, suddenly, she had a world of opportunity at her fingertips. She spent days meeting with the lawyers. They explained every detail carefully, making sure she understood what was hers and what it meant. She learned about companies that had been started decades ago, businesses that had expanded internationally, and investments that had multiplied quietly over the years. Each conversation revealed more than she expected, and the realization that she held such power in her hands began to sink in. Even as she learned, she didn't let excitement rush her decisions. She wanted to understand everything fully. She spent nights reviewing financial statements, learning about investments, and understanding the company's histories. Each document told a story of success and struggle, a story her father had built but had left unfinished, waiting for someone to continue it. During this time, she also reflected on her marriage and what she had lost, though not in the way anyone else imagined. She didn't dwell on resentment or anger. Instead, she thought about how the experience had shaped her resilience, her patience, and her strength. She realized that the quiet endurance she had maintained during her marriage had prepared her for the challenges that lay ahead in managing a vast fortune. She also considered the people around her. Her former husband and his family had underestimated her completely. They believed she had walked away with nothing, but now the balance had shifted. She didn't want revenge, but she recognized that life had a way of surprising those who take others for granted. Once she felt ready, she began to meet with business advisors and managers who had been overseeing her father's companies. Many of them were surprised to meet her. They had been accustomed to working quietly behind the scenes, reporting only to the family trust. Now, a young woman with calm authority and clear purpose was in charge. She asked questions that no one had expected. She wanted to know how decisions were made, how money had been invested, and what the company's goals had been. Unlike others in her position, she didn't act like she was entitled to anything. She wanted to understand the work that had already been done and how she could contribute to its growth. In the weeks that followed, she began to make small but significant decisions. She restructured a few departments, introduced new communication systems, and began to attend meetings regularly. Employees noticed her calm confidence. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did offer suggestions, they were thoughtful and precise. Slowly, she earned their respect. All the while, she kept her personal life quiet. Friends and neighbors saw a woman who had returned to her roots, someone who seemed content to rebuild her life away from the spotlight. But in reality, she was building a powerful presence behind the scenes. Every decision she made was careful, strategic, and grounded in the knowledge she had gained from her father's careful planning. Her former husband, meanwhile, was unaware of the changes. He was focused on his own struggles and the declining performance of his family's business. Poor decisions, overconfidence, and lack of attention had begun to weaken their position in the market. He continued to believe she had disappeared, that she had no resources, no influence, and no reason to return. But life was preparing a surprise. She wasn't planning a dramatic confrontation or a public reveal. Instead, she worked quietly, building a foundation that would allow her to re-enter the world she had left behind on her own terms. She also spent time learning about modern business practices. Technology had changed the landscape since her father's time, and she understood that knowledge was as important as inherited wealth. She read reports, attended seminars, and spoke with experts. Every detail added to her growing understanding and confidence. Months passed, and the companies she now controlled began to flourish quietly. Partnerships expanded, new investments grew, and employees began to notice a shift in the company culture. Her calm but decisive leadership brought energy to projects that had once been stagnant. Slowly, the company's reputation improved, and whispers of a rising new figure began circulating in business circles. During this time, she also reflected on her personal growth. She realized that the challenges of her past had prepared her for the responsibilities she now carried. The patience, resilience, and quiet determination she had cultivated were invaluable assets in her new role. She had learned that strength was not always loud. Sometimes, it was silent, steady, and deeply grounded. Despite her growing influence, she kept her public profile low. Most media mentions focused on the companies and their achievements, rarely naming her. She preferred it that way. Her focus was on building something lasting, something meaningful, not on seeking attention or approval. She also thought about the people she had once known, including her former husband. The memory of how she had been underestimated reminded her that the world often judges by appearances. But she had learned that true power and influence often grow quietly, away from the eyes of those who only look for obvious signs of wealth or status. One day, she received an invitation to a charity event, a gathering that would bring together many influential people, including investors, business leaders, and prominent families. Her former husband's family would undoubtedly be there, focused on maintaining their position and reputation. She didn't rush to accept or reject the invitation. Instead, she considered it carefully. She realized that attending would not be about confrontation. It would be an opportunity to step back into a world she once left, but this time on her own terms, with knowledge, resources, and confidence she had built quietly over months. For now, she focused on preparation. She refined her understanding of the companies she managed, strengthened relationships with advisors, and ensured that her influence would be recognized not through loud announcements, but through thoughtful, effective action. The quiet confidence she had developed over the past months had transformed her. She was no longer the woman who had simply signed divorce papers silently. She was a leader, a decision-maker, and a guardian of her father's legacy. And soon, she would return to a world that had once dismissed her, surprising everyone with the depth of her knowledge, the power she had inherited, and the grace with which she carried it. Her past and her future now stood together, intertwined in a way that would soon astonish those who thought they understood her. Every step she took, every decision she made, built toward a moment when the quiet woman would be seen for exactly who she truly was, not defined by what others expected, but by her own strength, intelligence, and determination. The time of waiting was over. She had moved from the shadows of her past into the beginnings of a powerful and unexpected presence. And although most people around her still believed she had lost everything, she knew the truth. She had everything she needed to shape a future that would astonish them all. Months passed, and the woman continued to work quietly, but the changes she made were powerful and growing steadily. The companies she now managed were becoming more organized and efficient. Employees noticed the difference immediately. Meetings were no longer rushed or chaotic. Decisions were made with clarity, and everyone was asked to explain their ideas fully. She listened more than she spoke, but when she spoke, her words carried weight. People began to respect her judgment. Her leadership was subtle but effective. She did not demand attention, nor did she try to control everything at once. She studied each department carefully, learning about strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. She asked questions that forced people to think, and she encouraged honesty and transparency. Slowly, a culture of trust and professionalism began to emerge. Employees who had once been frustrated with bureaucracy now felt motivated and involved. While she worked tirelessly behind the scenes, she also took time to understand the broader picture. She reviewed financial statements, market trends, and international investments. The knowledge she gained was more than just numbers. She began to see patterns, opportunities, and potential risks. She realized that the wealth she had inherited could grow far beyond what anyone expected, but only if managed carefully. Her former husband remained unaware of the changes taking place. He continued to focus on his own life and the challenges his family business faced. Poor management decisions had left gaps that weakened the company's position. He assumed she had disappeared and would never return. He did not suspect that the woman he once underestimated was quietly becoming a force to be reckoned with. She also recognized the importance of learning from the past. Her father had built this fortune carefully, but some areas had been left underdeveloped or stagnant. She made it a priority to modernize operations, introduce new systems, and make sure the companies were prepared for the future. She understood that sustaining wealth required more than inheritance. It required vision, action, and careful planning. Every decision she made was strategic. She began forming new partnerships, expanding investments, and exploring opportunities in different countries. Each step was calculated, not reckless. Employees were impressed by her ability to understand complex business matters without seeming impatient or domineering. She inspired confidence by remaining calm and deliberate in her approach. Meanwhile, her personal life remained private. Friends and neighbors saw her as someone who had returned to her roots, someone who appeared content and focused on rebuilding a quiet life. They did not realize the depth of her transformation, the knowledge she had gained, and the influence she was beginning to exert. She did not need recognition from them. She had learned that true impact often grows silently, away from the gaze of those who only see surface appearances. Despite keeping a low profile, word began to spread in business circles. A few investors and executives noticed changes in company performance, and whispers started about a new leader emerging from unexpected circumstances. Some were intrigued, others skeptical, but all could not ignore the results. The companies were performing better, earning respect in markets that had once overlooked them. She spent long hours in her office, reviewing reports, planning strategies, and meeting with advisors. Her life had changed completely since signing those divorce papers. What had once seemed like an ending had become a beginning. She had grown more confident, more knowledgeable, and more determined. Every day she spent learning and acting reinforced her ability to navigate a world that had once dismissed her. Her former husband's family, meanwhile, began to notice challenges. Their business faced increasing competition, and investors grew restless. Decisions made hastily had led to losses, and confidence in their leadership began to waver. Yet they remained unaware of the transformation taking place quietly in the background. They assumed she had moved on, that she had no resources, and that she would not reappear in their world. She had learned that patience was powerful. While they struggled, she focused on understanding, planning, and strengthening her position. She did not rush into confrontation or public displays. Instead, she worked in the shadows, letting results speak for themselves. Her quiet, steady progress was preparing her for a moment when her presence would be undeniable. Part of her strategy involved learning modern business techniques. She attended workshops, consulted experts, and studied trends in technology, marketing, and finance. Every bit of knowledge strengthened her ability to make informed decisions. She understood that wealth alone did not guarantee success. Skill, insight, and preparation were equally important. Over time, she also recognized the importance of building a supportive network. She connected with trusted advisors, mentors, and employees who shared her vision and values. By surrounding herself with capable people, she ensured that her decisions would be implemented effectively. She treated everyone with respect, valuing their input and encouraging collaboration. This approach contrasted sharply with the way her former husband had managed his business, and the difference became increasingly clear. As her influence grew, so did her confidence. She began making bolder decisions, expanding investments into new areas, and exploring opportunities previously ignored. Each success reinforced her belief in her ability to manage the wealth she had inherited. She no longer felt like a passive recipient of fortune. She was an active leader, shaping the direction of her companies and building a legacy of her own. Her former husband's world, by contrast, was shrinking. The more he tried to maintain control, the more gaps appeared in his business. Poor timing, impatience, and underestimation of challenges led to setbacks. He still assumed she had no power, no resources, and no reason to interfere. He could not imagine the quiet, deliberate force that had grown in her absence. She also thought about the people she had once known socially. Some had looked down on her, assuming she had married for money. Others had ignored her, believing she had no influence or presence. She realized that appearances often deceive, and that the most significant power often grows quietly, unnoticed until it is fully realized. One day, she received an invitation to a major charity gala. The event would bring together some of the city's most influential business leaders, investors, and prominent families. Her former husband's family would undoubtedly attend, focused on maintaining their position and reputation. She did not rush to accept. She considered carefully how she would appear, what impression she wanted to leave, and how she would present herself. She understood that this event could be an opportunity to step back into the world she had left, not for confrontation, but to demonstrate the strength, knowledge, and influence she had cultivated quietly over months. Her preparations were deliberate. She reviewed her company's achievements, ensured that her financial affairs were in order, and met with advisors to plan her public engagement. She wanted her presence to reflect confidence and competence, not arrogance. Every detail mattered. As the gala approached, whispers in business circles began to grow. People noticed the success of the companies she managed, but most had no idea who was behind the changes. They speculated, made guesses, and tried to trace the source of the improvements. Her former husband, however, remained unaware, still believing she had no role to play in the city's business scene. The woman, meanwhile, felt ready. She had transformed from someone who quietly signed divorce papers into a strategic leader, a capable decision-maker, and a person whose influence was felt even without public recognition. Her strength had grown not from wealth alone, but from patience, observation, learning, and deliberate action. She understood that her moment of return would not be about revenge. It would be about presence, competence, and the quiet demonstration of her growth. She would show that the woman everyone once underestimated had not disappeared. Instead, she had prepared, learned, and built a foundation that no one could ignore. Every day before the gala, she reviewed her plans, ensured her companies were running smoothly, and confirmed her schedule. She was methodical, deliberate, and calm. She did not rush, nor did she allow herself to be distracted by the past. Her focus was on the present and the opportunities ahead. By the time the evening of the gala arrived, she had grown into a figure of quiet authority. She understood business, strategy, and people in a way that few expected. She carried herself with grace, confidence, and purpose. And she knew that when she arrived at the event, she would not simply be attending. She would be making a presence that could not be overlooked. The quiet work she had done behind the scenes had prepared her for this moment. Every decision, every effort, every hour spent learning had built toward a presence that would astonish those who thought they had understood her. Her former husband, still struggling with his declining business and unaware of the growing influence of the woman he once dismissed, could not imagine what was about to happen. He assumed she was absent, powerless, and irrelevant. But she was ready, and the world would soon see a woman who had quietly turned a perceived ending into the beginning of a powerful, surprising, and undeniable story. Her patience, intelligence, and quiet determination had transformed her. What had once seemed like a simple, ordinary life was now the foundation for something extraordinary. She had learned that true strength often grows unseen, and that the moment to reveal it must be chosen wisely. And now the time was coming. The moment when the woman who had built silently, learned patiently, and acted deliberately would return. Not for conflict, but to show the world the power of a life rebuilt with careful thought, courage, and resilience. This was no longer the story of a divorce. It was the story of transformation, of quiet preparation, and of a future about to unfold in ways no one expected. The night of the charity gala arrived, and the city seemed to sparkle with lights, laughter, and excitement. Luxury cars lined the street, and guests in elegant attire moved gracefully through the crowd. The atmosphere was lively, filled with the sound of music, soft conversation, and the occasional clink of glasses. This event had drawn the city's most influential business leaders, prominent families, and investors, all hoping to make connections, secure deals, or simply be seen among their peers. Inside, the room was already buzzing with activity. Her former husband and his family were present, speaking with investors and networking carefully. Their conversations carried a tone of confidence, but beneath it lay subtle tension. Their business had faced setbacks, and the gala was an opportunity to rebuild image and reputation. They had no idea what awaited them. Outside, a sleek black car slowed to a stop. The driver stepped out, opened the door, and helped a woman in elegant attire step onto the red carpet. She moved with calm confidence, her presence commanding attention without effort. Her eyes scanned the crowd briefly, not in search of anyone in particular, but simply taking in the scene. Whispers began almost immediately. People turned toward her, murmuring to each other. It took only a few seconds for recognition to spread. Some guests blinked in surprise, others whispered in disbelief. This was the woman who had quietly signed her divorce months earlier. The same woman they had assumed had vanished. She smiled politely, acknowledging greetings from a few early acquaintances. She did not rush or exaggerate her presence. Instead, she moved with purpose, her calm demeanor drawing respect naturally. People noticed her quietly confident posture, the thoughtful way she responded to each introduction, and the clear sense of authority she carried without demanding it. Inside the hall, her former husband froze. His conversation halted mid-sentence as he realized who had just entered. His eyes widened, and for a moment he could not move. He had believed she had disappeared, that she had no resources, no influence, and no reason to return. Now, she stood at the center of the room, poised, confident, and commanding attention effortlessly. Guests around the hall began to recognize her too. Whispers grew louder, spreading like a current through the crowd. "Is that?" one person asked quietly. Another nodded, eyes wide. "It is her. I can't believe it." By the time she reached the main area of the gala, almost everyone knew her name and story. Her entrance was not dramatic, but it was powerful. She did not need to announce her wealth or achievements. Her presence alone, combined with the quiet confidence she carried, was enough to command respect. People instinctively gravitated toward her, eager to shake her hand, speak with her, or simply be near someone who had quietly transformed the companies she now led. Investors and business leaders approached her with curiosity and respect. Some offered congratulations, others discussed potential partnerships, and a few simply wanted to hear her thoughts on the recent success of the companies she managed. She responded with calm intelligence, listening attentively, asking thoughtful questions, and sharing insights that demonstrated her understanding of both the companies and the broader market. Meanwhile, her former husband's family struggled to regain composure. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand how she had returned, how she had grown so powerful, and why no one had known about her influence until now. Their confidence wavered as they realized that the woman they once underestimated had become a force in the business world. Quietly, deliberately, and effectively. She made her way through the crowd, greeting people politely, acknowledging their admiration without arrogance. Each interaction was measured, graceful, and thoughtful. She did not flaunt her wealth, but it was evident in the way she carried herself, in the respect she received, and in the subtle but undeniable influence she now held. Her former husband finally found the courage to approach her. His voice was strained, his posture stiff. I didn't expect to see you here," he said. She looked at him calmly, a gentle smile on her face. "I am here," she replied. Her voice was quiet, steady, and unshakable. He hesitated, searching her expression for hints of anger, resentment, or desire for revenge. But all he found was calm, confidence, and the quiet authority of someone who had grown beyond past grievances. He realized, perhaps too late, that the woman he had once dismissed had prepared herself for this moment with patience, intelligence, and determination. Around them, other guests began to notice the tension. Some whispered, some watched with curiosity, but most were captivated by the quiet drama unfolding in front of them. She did not acknowledge the whispers. She focused on conversations that mattered, decisions that needed her input, and relationships that could grow through mutual respect and collaboration. Throughout the evening, she engaged with people in a way that was both approachable and commanding. She did not dominate conversations, nor did she attempt to overshadow anyone. Instead, she listened carefully, offered insight when appropriate, and demonstrated a depth of knowledge and understanding that few expected. Her former husband's attempts to speak with her grew increasingly awkward. He realized that the woman he once assumed would remain quiet and powerless had transformed into someone who could navigate the room with grace, intelligence, and influence. Every word she spoke carried weight. Every decision she made reflected thought and strategy. As the night progressed, she announced her support for a new foundation aimed at helping young entrepreneurs from small towns. Her speech was brief but powerful. She spoke about opportunity, growth, and the importance of resilience. Her message resonated with the audience, earning a standing ovation. The applause was not just for her words, but for the presence she now embodied. A woman who had quietly built strength, knowledge, and influence, and now used it to make a meaningful impact. Her former husband watched, realizing that he had underestimated her completely. He had believed she would remain a passive figure, overlooked and dismissed. Instead, she had returned not to compete with him, but to show that her quiet, resilience, and deliberate preparation had transformed her into someone whose influence could not be ignored. Guests approached her afterward, eager to speak, network, or express admiration. She engaged with each interaction gracefully, balancing professionalism with warmth. She did not seek attention for herself, but her presence naturally drew it. People admired her intelligence, her calm confidence, and the thoughtful way she carried herself. As the evening drew to a close, she stepped outside for a brief moment of quiet. The city lights glimmered, the air was cool, and the sounds of the gala faded behind her. She took a deep breath, reflecting on how far she had come. From the quiet signing of divorce papers to this moment of quiet authority and recognition, her journey had been defined not by anger or revenge, but by patience, learning, and deliberate action. She realized that true power often grows unseen, in preparation, in knowledge, and in quiet resilience. The people who had underestimated her had been blinded by assumptions, unaware of the effort, intelligence, and careful planning that had brought her to this moment. Inside, the gala continued, filled with laughter, conversations, and celebrations. She returned to the room with calm confidence, ready to continue her interactions, knowing that her presence had already left an indelible impression. She moved through the crowd with purpose, aware that the quiet woman they had once dismissed had now become a figure of influence, respect, and authority. Her former husband remained in the room, struggling to process the reality of her return. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that underestimating her had been a grave mistake. Yet she showed no anger, no desire for confrontation. She had grown far beyond the past, and her focus was on the future she was creating, not on punishing those who had doubted her. By the end of the night, the impact of her presence was clear. Guests left conversations inspired, impressed, and eager to collaborate. Investors took note, families whispered about her influence, and even her former husband could no longer deny the depth of her transformation. She had arrived silently, but the effect of her presence would continue to be felt long after the gala ended. She had returned not as someone seeking revenge, but as someone who had built quietly, learned patiently, and acted deliberately. Her calm confidence, thoughtful engagement, and clear authority had made an impression that no one could ignore. The woman who had once signed divorce papers silently had now stepped into the spotlight, not for drama, but for recognition of the power she had cultivated with patience, intelligence, and resilience. As the night concluded and guests began to leave, she walked through the crowd one last time. Handshakes were exchanged, conversations concluded, and respect was evident on every face. She smiled politely, acknowledging greetings, But she remained grounded, aware that the true measure of her transformation was not the applause or recognition, but the quiet strength she carried and the future she was creating. Her journey had been defined by resilience, patience, and deliberate action. From the quiet moments of her divorce to the powerful presence she now commanded, she had transformed her life in ways that astonished everyone who had underestimated her. And as she stepped out into the night, she knew that this was only the beginning of a story defined by intelligence, influence, and the quiet power of a woman who had learned to shape her own destiny. The gala ended, and the crowd slowly dispersed into the cool night air. Lights twinkled across the city streets, and the distant hum of traffic filled the quiet spaces between the laughter and conversation that had echoed throughout the evening. She stepped outside for a moment of calm, taking a deep breath and allowing herself a rare pause. Months of careful planning, hard work, and quiet preparation had brought her to this night. She had arrived not as the woman everyone thought she was, small, powerless, and overlooked, but as someone who had grown in knowledge, strength, and influence far beyond their expectations. Her mind reflected on the journey that had led to this point. The years of her marriage had been difficult. She had faced subtle dismissals, cold words, and constant reminders that she did not truly belong. Yet those experiences had taught her patience and resilience. Each quiet day, each moment of endurance, had prepared her for the challenges she would face after stepping away. She realized that her strength was not born from wealth alone, but from the way she had learned to navigate life with clarity, courage, and focus. She returned inside the venue, moving gracefully through the crowd. People approached her with curiosity, admiration, and a desire to speak with her. Each interaction reinforced the impression she had already made. Investors discussed potential opportunities, business leaders sought advice, and prominent families quietly acknowledged the shift in influence she now commanded. She responded with calm intelligence, listening carefully, asking thoughtful questions, and offering insights that reflected her deep understanding of both people and business. Her former husband remained nearby, watching her with a mixture of disbelief and unease. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had misjudged her entirely. He had believed she would remain in the background, powerless and irrelevant. Instead, she had quietly built a presence that no one could ignore. Every conversation she engaged in, every decision she influenced, reflected the careful preparation and deliberate action that had characterized her life since the divorce. The woman moved confidently across the room, connecting with those who mattered to her mission. She was not seeking attention or revenge. She was demonstrating the quiet power of preparation and intelligence. Each handshake, each smile, and each conversation reinforced her authority and presence. People admired her calm demeanor, the depth of her understanding, and the quiet way she carried herself. She paused for a moment near a table where young entrepreneurs had gathered, quietly listening to each other's ideas. Her eyes softened as she observed their energy, determination, and dreams. This was the future she wanted to support. She believed that opportunity should not be limited to those born into wealth or influence. Talent, effort, and vision should be recognized and nurtured, regardless of background. Her thoughts returned to the foundation she had announced earlier that evening. The initiative would support young people from small towns, giving them resources, mentorship, and guidance to pursue their ambitions. The applause she received during the announcement had been heartfelt, but it was not the recognition that mattered most. It was the knowledge that she could make a tangible difference, that she could turn her experiences, skills, and resources into opportunities for others. As she moved through the room, she noticed familiar faces, people who had once judged her, underestimated her, or dismissed her entirely. Some of them looked uncomfortable, realizing that the woman they had overlooked had quietly become a figure of influence and respect. She did not seek to confront them or make them feel small. Instead, she continued to engage with warmth, professionalism, and calm authority. Her strength lay not in confrontation, but in presence, preparation, and quiet assurance. Throughout the evening, she maintained a balance between accessibility and authority. She listened as much as she spoke, offered advice when appropriate, and allowed her knowledge, confidence, and composure to speak for her. People quickly recognized that she was not defined by past circumstances or by the opinions of others. She had created her own path, her own influence, and her own story. Her former husband finally approached her once more. This time, there was less hesitation, but the tension remained. I can't believe what you've done," he admitted quietly. His voice reflected a mix of surprise, regret, and respect. She smiled gently, maintaining eye contact. "I didn't do it to prove anything to anyone," she replied. "I did it for myself, and to honor the work and vision my father left behind." Her tone was calm, firm, and unshakable. He struggled to respond, realizing that the woman he had once underestimated had grown far beyond the confines of his assumptions. She had not acted out of anger or revenge. Instead, she had quietly built strength, intelligence, and influence that could not be ignored. Around them, other guests noticed the exchange. Some whispered in admiration, others observed quietly, and most were captivated by the quiet power she radiated. She did not seek to display it, yet it was evident in every gesture, every word, and every decision she made that night. She took the time to speak with young entrepreneurs, investors, and colleagues who sought guidance. Each conversation was deliberate and meaningful, reflecting her ability to connect, inspire, and lead. She understood that influence was not measured by wealth alone, but by the ability to guide, support, and elevate others. As the evening drew to a close, she stepped aside for a quiet moment, reflecting on how far she had come. From the day she had signed her divorce papers silently to this night of recognition, she had grown through patience, learning, and deliberate action. She realized that life often unfolds in unexpected ways, and that true power comes not from rushing, but from careful preparation, resilience, and focus. The city outside the gala shimmered in the night, lights reflecting off glass buildings and streets. She stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool air. The sounds of the city were calm now, distant from the energy of the event inside. She felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The journey had been long, and the work had been quiet, but it had been purposeful and deliberate. She reflected on the lessons learned from her marriage, her family, and her father's legacy. She understood that patience, observation, and deliberate effort were more valuable than immediate results or recognition. She had grown into someone who could navigate complex situations with clarity and calm. Her influence was not loud or ostentatious, but it was undeniable. Her thoughts turned to the future. The foundation she had created would continue to grow, supporting young people and giving them the tools to pursue their dreams. Her companies were stronger than ever, guided by her vision, intelligence, and careful planning. And she knew that her life had been transformed not by circumstances alone, but by the choices she had made, the patience she had exercised, and the deliberate actions she had taken. Returning inside, she noticed the final guests saying their goodbyes. She greeted them with warmth and professionalism, leaving a lasting impression that extended beyond the event itself. Investors, colleagues, and friends departed inspired, aware that they had witnessed the emergence of someone remarkable. Her former husband's family, meanwhile, quietly acknowledged the shift in influence. They could not ignore the fact that the woman they had once underestimated had grown into a leader, a figure of respect, and someone whose presence changed the dynamics of the room and the perception of the business world. By the end of the night, she had achieved something profound, not through confrontation, drama, or revenge, but through quiet preparation, patience, intelligence, and resilience. She had shown that a person underestimated by the world could rise to a position of influence and respect, simply by cultivating knowledge, strength, and calm confidence. As the gala concluded and she stepped into a quiet car waiting outside, she reflected once more on the journey that had brought her here. The signing of the divorce papers had been only the first step. The months of learning, preparation, and careful action had transformed her into someone capable of leading, influencing, and making a difference. She understood that her power did not come from wealth alone. It came from patience, intelligence, deliberate action, and the ability to remain calm and focused even in difficult situations. She had learned that quiet preparation often yields the most significant results, and that respect and influence are earned through thoughtfulness, competence, and integrity. The car drove through the city streets, lights reflecting softly on its polished surface. She looked out the window, feeling a sense of calm accomplishment. The woman who had once signed divorce papers silently had returned stronger than anyone expected, prepared to shape her own future on her terms. Her journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new opportunities, and new decisions to make. But she knew she was ready. She had learned to navigate the world with clarity, intelligence, and quiet strength. She had discovered that true power is not measured by recognition alone, but by the ability to act with purpose, inspire others, and shape one's destiny with confidence. For the first time in years, she felt truly free, not just from the past, but from the limitations that others had tried to impose upon her. She had proven to herself, and quietly to the world, that patience, intelligence, and deliberate action could transform even the most unexpected circumstances into a story of success, influence, and respect. The city lights blurred outside the window as she reflected on the path she had traveled. She had faced challenges, endured underestimation, and quietly prepared for months. Now, she had emerged not only as a wealthy heiress but as a thoughtful, capable, and respected leader. Her journey was a testament to resilience, patience, and the quiet power of preparation. And as the car carried her through the night, she knew that this was only the beginning. Her story, once thought to be over when she signed the divorce papers, had transformed into something far greater. She had created a future that was entirely her own, one defined by intelligence, strength, and the quiet, undeniable force of a woman who refused to be underestimated. She smiled softly, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. Every challenge, every quiet effort, every moment of patience had led her to this point. She had turned what seemed like an ending into the beginning of a remarkable story, and she knew that the world would continue to watch, sometimes in surprise, sometimes in admiration, as she shaped the next chapters of her life with calm determination, intelligence, and the quiet power that had been with her all along. Her journey had taught her that true success is measured not by how quickly one acts, but by how thoughtfully, patiently, and deliberately one prepares. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable than anyone had imagined. And as the city lights passed by outside the window, she felt a sense of quiet triumph, knowing that her life was now fully her own, and the future was a canvas waiting for her vision, determination, and unshakable confidence. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the faint sounds of the city. She leaned back in the car seat, reflecting on everything she had accomplished. She had transformed her life from a quiet ending into a beginning of strength, influence, and purpose. She had proven that even the most underestimated individuals could rise, quietly, deliberately, and powerfully, to shape their own destiny. And with that knowledge, she felt ready for whatever came next, confident in herself, her abilities, and the remarkable journey that lay ahead.